A reading from the first letter of Paul to the Thessalonians. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even though, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have died. For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will by no means precede those who have died. For the Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds, together with them to meet the Lord in the air. So we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. The word of the Lord.
With you. This is a reading from the Good News according to Matthew. This morning's gospel is about a wedding with 10 bridesmaids. Wow, that's not bad. And it's a little simple story, but it has its own meaning that we read soon. When talking about his coming in glory, Jesus spoke this parable to his disciples. The kingdom of heaven is like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. And as the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout. Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him. Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise replied, no, there will be not enough for you and for us. You'd better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves. And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Like the other bridesmaids, later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he replied, truly, I tell you, I don't know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Complicated little story about a wedding, isn't it? Wedding and bridesmaids and lamps and oil and all that sort of stuff. I must say, today's weddings, I do weddings pretty regularly, and today's weddings have They've got wedding organisers. Got to have your wedding organiser, or some brides do. They have dietary choices, you know. I haven't got many dietary choices anyway. We've got electronic invitations that you press accept. I like those. They just hit the button. We have gift registers. Weddings are really organised sorts of things. Usually, I got a wedding invitation the other day for something in July next year, and I hit accept if I'm still alive. I live a sort of a conditional life these days. Anyway, the point I'm making is, today weddings are big industry. I regret that, but anyway, that's the way that people want to organise themselves, and I suppose that's fair enough. But in the first century Palestine, in the day when this story was told, when this parable was developed, things were very different. Let me tell you about it. Wedding invitations didn't state the time or the day. Sounds confusing, doesn't it? But they'd just say, Thomas is marrying Barbara at some future date, and everyone would be delighted. Then the families would come together and do all of that detailed preparation that we're familiar with, the food, the wine, the musicians, the decorations, the fine apparel. That seems to have been always the case with weddings. When the preparations were made, invitations went out to the guests, only very close to the time. Guests arrived at the home of the bride, and there they stayed to await the groom. Sounds a bit disorganised, doesn't it? But this is a very much more of a domestic sort of a scene. And the guests would arrive and await the groom's pleasure. According to the ancient tradition, the groom and his friends would often play a little game. And if they caught the bridal party unawares while they slept, for example, that would be a wonderful idea. That would be a surprise. And they'd have to get the wedding moving, very quickly. Very different, isn't it? But it's sort of playful, it's domestic. It's of a different time and of a different set of needs. And that's the context of this gospel this morning. It ends up with the point of the gospel being made pretty quickly, pretty clearly. It says, stay awake. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. The gospel is saying to us, stay awake. The suggestion is we're a little bit asleep about all sorts of things. There's a Jesuit writer of spirituality, a fellow I like a lot, Anthony de Mello. He died a number of years ago, but de Mello said that all of spirituality can be summed up in those words, stay awake. Stop sort of allowing yourself to be lulled into sometimes a false sense of what's going on by all sorts of things. So that's the question. And the question, I guess, is, what do we have to stay awake to? And that question is going to be answered very differently from one person to another. So the prevailing question in the gospel is, what are you asleep to in your life? What are you asleep to in the world in which you live? What are you asleep to in the things that are happening in your own lives? What are you asleep to about things that are happening to other people very close to you? What do you need to be awake to? Let me make a couple of points and leave that question with you, really, because it's a very personal question that nobody else can answer. except you. What are you asleep to? But there's one point I'd like to make, and that is, it's De Mello again that I'm quoting. De Mello said that people mistakenly assume that their thinking is done in their head. It is actually done in your heart, which first dictates the conclusion, then commands the head to provide the reasoning that will defend it. That's a bit complicated. Let me just repeat it again. People mistakenly assume that their thinking is done in their head. We're all very rational, very logical. Why can't you follow my logic? That's the sort of, well, that's me anyway. I don't know about you, but I take that stance often. I'm the most logical person in the world. People mistakenly assume that their thinking is done in their head. It's actually done in their heart, which first dictates the conclusion, then commands the head to provide the reasoning that will defend it. Just think of these things. My team won last night, by the way. Anyway. My team, my family, my tribe, my reputation, my behaviour. We're sort of glued to those, we're attached to those emotionally. And we construct reason to defend them often. I've had a bit of fun in the last few days. I've been. I must say, this is a confession to make to you, that I've been locked into television about the whole American election. I found it, don't know why, but I found it compelling. And I was almost counting the votes myself, in fact. It's not a very thing I'm greatly proud of, but nevertheless, I was going to. But the game I played was to move from two American networks, from CNN, a Ted Turner network, and Fox News, to move from one to the other, to see how each of those networks were interpreting what was going on. They could have been talking about different countries. It was astonishing. You might have been doing something like that yourself. They were talking about two different events. They're talking about from completely two different perspectives. Why? Because their heart was with one candidate rather than the other. And that sense of seeing the world through their own eyes, you know, the old phrase I've quoted here often, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. Now, I've got really strong bias about the American election, let's put that example aside. But to understand it and to see it clearly as seen to me, switching from one channel to another, was to understand something about myself. So how do we escape? How do we advance? That's the only question worth looking at. How do we advance from that rather, well, they call it selected perception, don't they? You only see things from your own heart point of view. A more brutal criticism is that we're all biased. We're all we work from our own prejudices and biases. How do we escape from it? Well, frankly, I don't know. And if I did, I'd be selling books in airports. But one way in people is begin to try to argue from the other's point of view. Begin to try to see the world through somebody else's eyes who you disagree with. Try to take their point of view, just as a matter of exercise. Come back to your own, of course, but to widen your point of view of trying to escape the demon of selected perception. And Perhaps that's one thing that we need to be awakened to. Awakened to the way our own mind works, that our own family, our own tribe, our own behaviour, our own reputation dictates the way we think. De Mello says, stay awake. The parable this morning is stay awake. Lift yourself up. Try to understand where you are asleep in your life. Begin to widen your point of view. Sounds easy. Of course, it's immensely difficult. But the parable doesn't back off that. It simply says to it, stay awake. By the way, that's a wonderful sort of a homily thing. When you look down at a congregation and see everyone asleep. Not you, other churches I'm talking about. But stay awake. That's the point of the gospel this morning.